At JTA, we are developing what we consider to be a core range of joinery planes. These planes are really beautifully made, and they are only a small part of what a traditional Japanese woodworker's toolbox might encompass, depending on their specific trade. There are a number of shapes that we don't have in our range, which include side cutting planes of both the flat and the angled side varieties, and a huge variety of channel cutting planes with side cutters and double knives, triple knives, and lots of different fence options and configurations. Sourcing those sorts of tools in the 21st century is becoming a real challenge. Up until recently, we were able to offer a Kakuri made rebate plane. Rebate planes are a very handy tool to have in the woodworker's kit. They're great for tuning joinery, tenons especially, both the shoulders and the cheeks, and for putting in rebates in boxes, drawers, and lots of other pieces of furniture. Kakuri never made a left-handed version of this. It is really handy to have rebate planes such as these ones, our tachibanas, in both a left and a right hand so that you can work both sides of a joint and be able to work around the grain direction of your timber. So only ever having an affordable $65 right-hand rebate plane, although not ideal, was certainly better than not having any at all. Recently, Kakuri told us that they would no longer be making the right-handed rebate plane. If you have one of these, hold on to it, treasure it. I envy you because I don't. This is Kakuri's new range of joinery planes. They are not a direct replacement for everything that the Kakurikana will do. However, they do give the hand-tooled woodworker some really good options when tuning joinery and putting in rebates. Today, I'm going to be showing you how I've tuned these and showing you what they can do. So, let's get into it. This is the double-edged rebate plane from Kakuri. I think that's what we'll call it, or at least it'll be something similar. And it is not a traditional plane by any stretch of the imagination. It's quite a modern contrivance. As you can see, it uses this quite interesting double blade. This blade is not a laminated steel. There is no high carbon edge in this blade. It is a single steel, and it also doesn't have a hollow ground back. It has two different backs, which have arrived from the factory not quite even in their grind. In using this plane, what I think I've decided is that it is not worth trying to tune both sides of the blade to cut at the same time in the same way. I think it is easier to set the blade up to cut on one side of the blade, and then if you need to cut on the other side of the blade, to tap the blade around and set it up to cut on the other. In sharpening this blade for the first time, what I discovered is that it will take some work. It is also really important to make sure that you hit the very outside corners of both sides of the blade. On this particular blade, I haven't quite hit the outside corner that I'm pointing at here. What that means is that that last half a mil is not a dead sharp blade, not dead flat and straight and in line with the rest of that cutting edge, and that makes it very hard to get a crisp corner. The side of the blade that I did hit the very corner of does give me crisp corners, and crisp corners is what we're all about with the rebate planes. So sharpening this for the first time will take some work in order to bring both of these corners into play. Seating this blade in the block was very, very easy. It is not thicker at the back than it is at the front, as with most blades. It simply beds with the pressure on the inside of each of these blades. It's sort of a mirror image, I guess, or an inside-out version of a standard smoothing plane. And interesting, you can see that the pressure on the blade itself actually is coming down through these dark lines here. So there's pressure from the back of the block into the channel. If this blade were to come loose and need to be patched up, I would glue a piece of paper onto the back here under that channel, just as I would with a regular plane. And that should tighten up the blade enough to give me some control. At the moment, it beds pretty much with hand pressure, which in a smoothing plane would be too light for my taste, but in this plane, I found manageable. With rebate planes, it is really important to line up the corner of your cutting edge right on the corner of your timber block, because that is what gives you your nice crisp corners. So I line up those corners as close as I can, sight down the blade, and then give it a tap. There you go, so with a little bit of tapping, I can feel that I've just got a lightly protruding blade. This fence is very handy. If you wanted to do a 6mm rebate, it would be a matter of measuring in 6mm. If you had a nice Shinwa ruler with a stop on it, this would be even easier. So there's 6mm at this end, There's 6mm at this end. So with the fence set to 6mm, I can put in a rebate. I'm just taking really fine cuts at the moment. We can ask this plane to take a little bit more, but we might not get as nice a finish. There we go, so that's a much thicker shaving, but that will speed up the job. What I find is that for some reason, something to do with the way I apply pressure to the plane, I end up with a deeper cut at one end and a shallower cut at the other. And furthest away from me is usually shallower. So giving it a few half-length strokes brings them back into level. So as you can see, we have a really crisp corner on our rebate at both ends of our cut, which is just as important. So here on the starting end of the leading edge, I've got a nice crisp corner. And here at the finishing edge, I've got another nice crisp corner. That allows me to take another piece of timber and butt it in there nice and snugly, and I can get a really good joint. Another good use for the double-edged rebate plane is tuning tenons. This is an example of a tenon that we have really roughly, I guess, gutsed out on a drop saw. For many people, using a combination of power tools and hand tools in the workshop is a good way to get things done. So I just wanted to show you what this can do when used with machinery. So the bulk of this waste has been wasted out with a power saw. I can take this fence, loosen it off, seat my plane to the depth I want, hold my fence where I want it, take it away, get a bit of a jimmy up. There we go, I'm fairly happy with that. Tighten my fence, and I can start to knock off the high spots of the joint. Once I've got a consistent sound, I know that I'm taking consistent shavings off the end grain, I now have a nicely tuned joint with speed because of the power tool and with accuracy and a nice finish because of the hand tool. I can also do the other side of this joint because it's a really addictive thing to do. There we have it. So one thing you can see here is that either the drop saw cut has not been the same distance from the edge as the other side of this tenon, or my fence has moved, and you can see that we have a series of eyelashes or waste that is not being taken by the blade. So I'm just going to loosen off my fence. I'm going to take the fence out of the game. I'm just going to make sure I hit them. There we go. So that is a really good result. One thing to be aware of is that when you're starting a cross grain cut with this tool, you don't have any nicking blade. So if you're starting a cross grain cut without a saw cut, you start to leave all of these eyelashes, this fluff. What that means is that the end of your cut and you can see there's another limitation of this tool. These screws are bottoming out on my bench now, so I can't actually continue to cut without lifting this up off the bench. But you can see that if this was a finished surface right here at the top, I have a little bit of work to do to keep that crisp and clean. So if you can mark this with a knife and then cut, or cut with a saw and then cut, you will get a much cleaner finish, as we have here. So that is rebates down the grain and tuning joinery with the double-bladed rebate plane. However, these are called Kakurikana. This is also a Kakurikana, and just for purposes of illustration, you can see that there's a significant difference between a highly hand-worked tool made by a smith that specializes in these sorts of things, and the more simple Kashigata option, which is called a comb-shaped Kakurikana, which is a much simpler tool. Here you have two blades, including a chip breaker, that wedge themselves inside a very large block, which is a quarter sawn and very beautiful. And here you have a single blade that is wedging itself inside this block. It is a little more fiddly. However, you can still get really good results. This was the first Kakurikana Kashigata Kakurikana that I tried to tune. I got a bit mixed up, and so I want to point out a couple of things so you don't get mixed up. These operate in exactly the same way as a regular Japanese smoothing plane. To bed the blade, we strike the blade right on the blade, and to pull the blade back out, we strike the back of the block. For some reason, I thought this was the opposite. It is not, and what I did was that I powered the blade in so hard that I have bent the block because I kept hitting it without observing what I was doing. Please don't do that. This will be fixable and remediable. However, it will take a fair bit of work. So rather than getting caught up on this particular plane, I have tuned this one. The luxuries of having two of them. One interesting thing about this plane was that what we are looking for is we're looking for a bottom that is square to the sides. That is really important to get the desired result in the joinery that you're working on. When I bed this blade the first time, I had a blade that was presenting with one side proud and the other side not presenting at all. That was really hard to manage. You don't really have much room for adjustment here in the back of this block. You've also got to hit it quite hard. So I've hit the back of the block to drop the blade down. We can see that the blade's dropped down away from the mouth. And from here, because this blade is actually wider than the slot, it then needs to lever out. And this one likes to lever the whole way around. So here is our blade. This blade is laminated. It is a really nice blade. I can shave my arm with it with a bit of sharpening. But what I wanted to show you is here, at the back of this slot, I have filed away the little ridge that presented itself in this corner. That's given me just enough adjustability on the blade. And the other thing I've done is that I've sharpened the blade to be square. It was not close enough to square from the factory to present a square to the cut. To reinsert the blade, we insert it halfway down, like so. It's bedded, and then we start to push, which engages the wedge shape. Once that's locked in, we can start to tap it. There we go. So that's presenting nice and square out of the base of the block. What is this plane used for? This plane is used for tuning trenches a lot of the time. So I'm going to make a little trench in this piece of camphor laurel. I'm going to enjoy using my Azabiki saw, which is a saw that I don't get to use often enough. And I'm going to waste it out with a chisel and then tune it with a plane. Let's get to work. So that was quite a nice way to spend a little bit of time. We have a nice crisp trench down the middle of our camphor, got nice clean 90-degree angle on our rebate, and we've got a nice clean tenon, all with these two tools. If you're looking at picking these up, it's important to know that you will need to tune them. I have done the soles of both of these on some glass and sandpaper to bring them into flat and true. I've made sure that the soles are nice and square to the sides. And I have also sharpened the blades, and that is probably the key point. Sharpening these blades is a must. You will not get any sort of performance out of them without spending some time on the edges. So I hope that's helpful. I hope that gives you a few options in your joinery toolkit, and I hope you enjoy your woodworking. See you next time.